The Senate Committee on Health. We have a little bit of house cleaning before we actually start hearing some bills. We do have a quorum. If we can establish that, please call the members.
Hernandez?
Here.
Hernandez here. Nguyen? Hall? Mitchell? Monning?
Here.
Monning here. Nielsen?
Here.
Nielsen here. Pan?
Here.
Pan here. Roth? Wolk? Wolk here.
Quorum has been established. We're going to adoption of the rules. Committee members have been given copies of our updated rules for the 2015-2016 legislative session. Without objection, the rules will be adopted.
So moved.
See no objection. Should we still call the roll? Okay, we do have one item on consent calendar. It's file item number 5, Senator Monning. We're going to go ahead. We have a motion by Senator Wolk for item number 5, SB 299. Can we call the members, please?
Hernandez?
Aye.
Hernandez, aye. Nguyen? Hall? Mitchell? Monning?
Aye.
Monning, aye. Nielsen?
Aye.
Nielsen, aye. Pan?
Aye.
Pan, aye. Roth? Wolk? Wolk, aye.
Okay, after dispensing with our consent calendar, adoption of the rules, a quorum has been established. Let me just kind of outline what the agenda is for this afternoon. Normally we have a file order, but because we have SB 128, which is going to be fairly controversial, I've asked it to be in special order. That'll go first. Normally, let me just explain that the tradition of the Senate Health has been 3 individuals for support, 3 individuals for opposition, and each individual was given 2 minutes, a total of 6 minutes for each support and opposition. Because this is a very controversial issue, I felt that we needed to change those normal operating procedures. What we are going to do is we're going to ask each side, those are in support and those are in opposition, and you can have as many individuals come up. There will be a half an hour for each, the proponents and the opponents. Then there will be time for members to ask questions. And then I understand that there will be quite a few people who would like to come up and testify and public comment. I believe a half an hour is plenty to get all of the arguments in. So what I will be asking for respectfully is that when you give your position, that you just present your name and position, or name and who you represent. So we will limit public comment only to that. The other thing too is for those of you who have not been to the Capitol in the past, and this is the first time in a hearing, we are asking that you not make any comments in the form of either yelling, raising your hand, raising signs, making gestures. You know, just try to be very respectful, not only to the opponents as well as the proponents of the measure, that we maintain decorum as well as professionalism in the committee hearing. So, especially those of you who have signs, I respect the fact that you come here, but please don't raise them and make any emotions at all. The other thing that is of a little concern, we are pretty packed down here, and I just want to make sure that we're not going to have any problems with the safety and or the fire marshals. So if at all possible, there's still plenty of room in the upper gallery. If those of you, if you can move up and we can try to thin out here as much as possible. If you're up in the gallery, you can still see the hearing, watch everything that's going on. Just for the safety down here, I was hoping that maybe the aisles can be cleared, and maybe if the sergeants can kind of check to make sure there's enough room for individuals to get through, walk in, or walk out. So with that, we are going to start off with item number 1, SB 128. That's Senator Wolk and Senator Monning. And we have both authors here. Good afternoon, and please proceed, members.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. First, I would like to say that we have seen the mock-up and we appreciate the work of the chair and of the staff, and we look forward to continuing this process through the Judiciary Committee, where we will be glad to work and take the amendments. Thank you very much for working with us. Death comes to all of us. We prefer not to think about it, but if we do, we might prefer to die in our sleep at a ripe old age, with no lingering illness or trauma, after having lived a rich and full life surrounded by family and friends. But for many, the end comes in a very different way. There can be pain, terrible pain and suffering. There can be an agonizing descent into physical and mental deterioration. Many of us have experienced this trauma with a friend or a relative. I was 17 when my young, vibrant mother ended a 3-year struggle with metastatic cancer. It was brutal. Sometimes the pain could be controlled, but too often it could not. And despite heroic treatment, the suffering was prolonged and unbearable for her and for us. It does not have to be this way. It should not be this way. SB 128 would establish the End-of-Life Option Act in California. This law would give California adult residents who are in their end stages of terminal illness and are mentally competent the option to get a prescription from their physician that will allow them to end their lives painlessly. We believe that this voluntary option is a compassionate addition to the existing continuum of care that may be used by modern medicine at the end of life, such as hospice and other palliative care. 2 physicians must confirm the prognosis. There must be two verbal and a written request witnessed by two others. A waiting period of 15 days must pass before the doctor writes a prescription. This practice, called aid in dying, is already recognized in other states. For 17 years in Oregon, 7 in Washington, Vermont, Montana, and New Mexico more recently. There's been a dramatic change in public opinion. 2/3 of Californians now support this approach, including majorities from every demographic subgroup, including physicians. All major California newspapers and many public officials have endorsed SB 128, including most recently Senator Dianne Feinstein. A major reason for the change in public opinion is that we have 17 years of evidence, of data, actual data, and research readily available to all on the internet. The fears of the opponents that there would be abuse or coercion of the elderly or the disabled, neglect by unscrupulous health plans or caregivers have proven unfounded. In 17 years, 1,327 have obtained a prescription. Many do not use it. Simply having the prescription in and of itself is a source of relief, knowing that if the pain becomes unbearable, they will not have to suffer. And one of the reasons that this law has worked humanely and safely, without abuse or lawsuit, are the comprehensive safeguards and protections that are built into the law. Our bill has these safeguards and more. And now my colleague, Senator Bill Monning, will talk more about the protections and assurances that we have added into the bill. Bill.
Well, thank you, Senator Wolk. I also want to add my thanks to Chair Hernandez and your staff for your cooperation with all parties and stakeholders to this important legislation. I will be offering some affirmative testimony or opening statement on safeguards of SB 128, and then we will be introducing witnesses in support according to the chair's generous affording of time to both supporters and opponents. As outlined by Senator Wolk, this legislation is only available if it becomes law for a terminally ill patient, adult, and resident of the state of California. Participation in this law is completely and totally voluntary, both for patient and primarily from a patient right point of view, but also for a physician or a medical institution, completely voluntary. A person may not qualify under the provisions of this bill solely because of age or disability. 2 separate physicians are required to confirm the patient's prognosis of having less than 6 months to live and must confirm the patient has the mental competency to make his or her own health care decision. Patients maintain the right to rescind their request for the medication at any time. The medication must be self-administered. Safeguards against coercion of patients by establishing felony penalties for coercion or forging a request are built into the law. The attending physician is required to discuss feasible alternatives or additional treatment alternatives with the terminally ill patient, including comfort care, hospice care, palliative care, and pain management. Physicians, pharmacists, and healthcare facilities are protected from civil or criminal liability and from professional disciplinary action if they fulfill a terminally ill, mentally competent patient's request. Once again, participation by doctors, pharmacists, and healthcare facilities is completely voluntary. No insurance policy for health insurance coverage or for life insurance coverage can be conditioned or modified based on a patient electing this option or not electing this option. If proof of any such coercion is made, it would be prosecuted as a felony. As in Oregon, our legislative proposal, SB 128, would require maintaining public records data while protecting patient confidentiality. So as in Oregon, we can see over a period of time trends of demographics of which members of the population are using, et cetera. So with those safeguards in place, we are confident that we've built upon the success and efficacy of Oregon, and we've included greater protections, including a translation requirement for California, that if an attending physician in the consultation with the patient is in a language other than English, then any written documentation must also be translated, including the application, and criteria for translator qualification is included in our legislation. We also provide the protections for physicians and pharmacists who voluntarily might participate in this. And before turning it over to our witnesses, I just want to address, we have met with those who have raised concerns, particularly some from the disability community, and I think it's fair to say that Senator Wolk and I take those concerns to heart, and we've crafted this legislation to address those protections in a manner that would protect any competent, mentally competent adult, and to make sure the safeguards protect any patient facing a terminal illness. And we've heard from those in the disability community who would prefer to have this option should they be diagnosed with a terminal illness, and we respect those for whom they would not want to elect this option. And with that, again, I want to thank Mr. Chair, and with the permission of the Chair, introduce our first witness, who is Debbie Ziegler, the mother of Brittany Maynard. We thank her for joining us today. And after Ms. Ziegler's testimony, we'll go in order as seated with doctors, patients, member of the clergy, who will self-introduce after Ms. Ziegler. And again, thank you, and thank you, members, for your courtesy with this hearing.
Thank you very much. Before we do get started with the proponents, one more announcement. The Senate has to be in session at 4 o'clock. We're going to do some business this afternoon. In the event that we don't get done here, we will recess and come back, because I anticipate there'll be quite a bit of discussion and a few questions, so I don't want anybody in the audience to think that it'll be over. So please forgive us if we have to interrupt at 4 o'clock. There is a time certain at 4 o'clock. Anyway, welcome, good afternoon, and please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman Dr. Hernandez and members of the Senate Health Committee. My name is Deborah Ziegler, and I am Brittany Menard's mama. I'm here today because my daughter asked me to speak up on behalf of the terminally ill. I would like to thank the committee for considering the End-of-Life Option Act, SB 128, which would allow a terminally ill, mentally competent person to request a prescription to shorten their dying process and to give them comfort and help them pass peacefully, like my daughter did. Brittany's brain tumor was first detected by doctors on January 1st of last year, and on January 10th, she underwent an 8-hour craniotomy. But they could only remove less than 40% of the tumor because the tumor was blooming out of her brain and was full of tentacles down into the brain. In spite of this, my husband and I researched and pursued any and all available medical treatment. We remained hopeful. We continued to pray. Tragically, months after her craniotomy, our family was informed that the cancer had roared back, filling her cranium again, jumping to high grade. We sought other medical opinions, all of whom concurred. Brittany was given less than 6 months to live. And worse, we learned of the horrible course that the tumor would take if left on its own. My daughter was terrified. California law forbade Brittany from using prescribed medication as an end-of-life option. And so our family went to great lengths, spent a great deal of money, and used up precious time and energy to establish residency in Oregon in order that Brittany could qualify for aid in dying, which had been used there successfully for 17 years. Brittany was visibly relieved when she got her prescription. Her face softened. She was comforted knowing that she had the means to escape her suffering. When Brittany first let me know that she was considering aid in dying, I shook my head no. I didn't want to hear it. I was in denial. But as my beloved daughter's suffering increased, I began to understand why she wanted to consider this option. It became painfully evident to my husband and me that there are some terminal illnesses where only death can release your loved one from agony. However much Brittany feared death, she feared losing herself, the essence of who she was, more. Death was not negotiable, but how she died was. Only if she moved out of California. However, Brittany was angry on behalf of Californians. She felt strongly that terminally ill patients deserve the same options she received. And she wisely realized that prolonging and intensifying suffering is not the same thing as extending life. My daughter knew that difference. My daughter lived that difference. Our medical system should always provide end-of-life care, including pain management, for those who are terminally ill. It is well documented that some terminal illnesses have what's called breakthrough pain, and it is pain beyond medical ability to control or manage. This means that people die, people we love, die moaning and twisting in pain. I submit my daughter's written testimony to the committee today. Californians agree with Brittany by a 2-to-1 margin. Brittany is not alone. Californians must take their own personal choice on their private journey to death. And we must respect the rights of those who do not think as we do. Loving Brittany meant honoring her wishes to die. Being a good mother meant letting go. when everything inside of me screamed, hold on. Thank you for listening with open minds. Perhaps when my heart broke wide open, it opened my mind as well. We are all going to die. The best thing we can do, the best thing we can hope for is to create something that lives forever. You have the power to create a bill that will support a basic human freedom. The time to act is now. The bill will live on long after you and I are gone. Thank you.
Thank you.
And really, thanks you.
Please state your name.
Hello, I'm Dr. Myron Turbo, and I'm here in support of Senate Bill 128. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Senate Committee on Health. In addition to being a board-certified medical oncologist, I was board-certified in hospice and palliative care. I served as a hospice medical director for over 20 years. I was a founding member of ANCO, the Association of Northern California Oncologists, as well as a past president of that organization. I was also a founding member of the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. I served on the clinical faculty at Stanford University School of Medicine for over 25 years. Although I'm retired from the practice of medicine, I still teach at Stanford as well as lecture on end-of-life issues. In the almost 40 years that I took care of patients with cancer, I saw 200 to 250 new patients each year. Of the approximate 8,000 new patients I saw over my career, 50% survived and 50% did not. I accompanied approximately 4,000 patients on the final journey of their life. Although I was skilled at palliative care, and I was able to bring all the advantages that hospice had at its disposal, some patients nonetheless suffered. And they would have welcomed what SB 128 can provide. Aid in dying is not a replacement for palliative care. It is an additional end-of-life option to be considered by patients and by all physicians, whether they are a hospice doc, a palliative care specialist, or an oncologist. As a medical student, I was taught, do no harm. In patients with a terminal illness, the harm is done by the underlying disease. And this law is directed at relieving suffering, not doing harm. Physicians are trained to be healers and to cure disease. As an oncologist, I learned that many patients cannot be cured. Some people's problems just can't be fixed. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, taught his students in ancient Greece, cure sometimes, comfort always. From my perspective, comforting a dying patient and relieving his or her suffering is the highest form of healing. Oregon enacted the Death with Dignity Act in 1997, and as we have heard, the law has worked well. And one of the beneficial aspects that the Oregon experience has demonstrated is the peace of mind that the passage of the law has brought to many people. Over 35% of Oregon patients who fill prescriptions do not ingest them, and they die from their underlying disease. And it's my belief that merely having that medication in hand brings peace of mind and solace to the patients and their families. In a similar fashion, the passage of this law will bring peace of mind to many Californians. I believe the passage of Senate Bill 128 will improve end-of-life care for all Californians. It will increase the frequency of end-of-life conversations that patients have with their physicians and their families. just as the passage of the Death with Dignity Act is done in Oregon, the passage of this law in California will increase hospice participation. And I believe that the fact that Oregon ranks 6th in the nation of having access to palliative care is related to the fact that it passed the Death with Dignity Act 17 years ago. So I thank you for your attention and allowing me to speak, and I urge this committee and the California legislature to pass the End of Life Option Act.
Thank you. Next presenter, state your name.